to a large degree, somebody else's experience of you informs you about yourself in a way that I don't think you could understand in any other way.
For Kierkegaard, they're never wholly separable. You still are going to care about the way that you appear.
Yeah.
So it's like that little goon cave that kind of results outside of work. That thing is a product of a world where we just spend all of our time working.
Women have kind of two physical changes that happen. They get their period, and then the second one where they have a child. Nothing quite to that degree happens with men.
It is that you get 24, 25-year-olds who think of themselves as basically kids still, and then you also have like the rest of society acting like, oh, well, that's still a kid. And it's like the founding fathers were like teenagers. It's a bigger problem for boys and girls, but it's still a problem for girls. The point is that you're not getting real challenges. You're not getting real opportunities to fail. It's all this abstract stuff where it's like, how much are you paying attention in a classroom? How much do you follow authority? It's very important to have a world that you grew up in, that you're paying back to, that you're building on, that you're committed to, you know, and in sinking those roots. And there are people who read Hegel seriously and people who do not.
Is there a version of leaving that is not adolescent?
I'll have to cook on that one. My name is David McKerracher. I do Theory Underground online. You can find me on Substack, no longer Instagram, because I currently don't have access to my account there, but hopefully I'll get it back eventually. I have a YouTube channel, and that's probably where most people find me, but I've been doing a lot of work on the Substack recently. And my credentials are basically, I have a master's in philosophy and alternative education, but I would say that most of the work that I've done, most of the research that I do has been and is as an autodidact. And I guess I would also add that theory, the way that I do it and what I'm thinking of when I use the word theory, is mostly continental philosophy.
What is continental philosophy?
So after Kant, there's a split in the field of philosophy. Yeah, after Kant, there's a split in the field of philosophy. And without getting too deep into it, basically, there are people who read Hegel seriously and people who do not. And the people who do, some of them hate him and go their own way. And they're still continental philosophers. They're not Hegelians. They might be Nietzscheans, they might be Kierkegaardians, they might be Heideggerians, they might be into Emmanuel Levinas, Sartre, Lacan. Marx would count as continental philosophy. And so reactions to Hegel who take him seriously versus reactions to him that don't take him seriously. The people who don't take him seriously would be the analytic philosophers. They tend to focus on propositional logic. They tend to just focus on little arguments about things. They're not trying to think about the big picture. So continental philosophers are always trying to think about the big picture. They did not survive in American or British Anglo academia. And a big part of that is because they were asking the bigger questions about society. And so I actually have a whole piece on it's called a socio-analytic critique of analytic philosophy. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm showing the history and development of analytic philosophy and how the category continental philosophy is just something that they created to write off philosophers that they don't like, starting with Hegel all the way through Sartre.
Okay, gotcha. Also, you and I disagree on the pronunciation of Sartre. But it's because I don't want to go French with it and go Sartre or anything like that. So we gotta anglicize and Americanize it.
You gotta say Sartre.
Sartre. When Sartre describes in the look and being in nothingness, he talks about, you're staring through you're staring through a keyhole. You hear footsteps behind you. What does he think is actually happening in that exact moment?
What he thinks is happening is basically the call of conscience that Heidegger was talking about before him, right? And so Sartre is basically, and I'm going to just anglicize it consistently.
That's fine.
Sartre is basically the French Heidegger. He continues that phenomenological project. And part of that project is going beyond solipsism. And so solipsism is, starting with Descartes, this radical questioning of, do other minds even exist? And so every philosopher in his own way is going to tackle that question. And so for Sartre, he's going to use this the fact that, you're in your own world, and then that world that you're in gets exploded by the gaze of the other, that is the thing that calls me into question, wakes me up out of my solipsism, and is always unpredictable, like totally not part of something that I could predict, so that's basically what he's getting at. He considers that to be a proof against solipsistic subjectivist theories.
Mm. He talked about in his late teens that he, I guess, became aware that he was not going to be able to seduce women or engage with them based on his face as a premise. And you've written a fair bit about clavicular and looks maxing and attraction and stuff like that. Do you think that that is him triumphing over the aesthetic sphere, or is that just him applying that same kind of logic just on his own strengths?
Well, there's two things going on here, and one is the aesthetic sphere. So I'll say something about the aesthetic sphere really quick before getting into the much bigger question of, is he just also doing that? And so the aesthetic sphere is one of the three spheres that Kierkegaard talks about. There's the aesthetic, there's the ethical, and there's the religious. And if anybody knows anything about Kierkegaard, well, then you might know that he likes the religious. He considers himself, or wants to be, a knight of faith. And so, he's thinking about his own life and how he spent a good deal of time pretty much just caring about appearances. He was an aesthete, he cared about being a sort of dandy, and then at some point he got over that and realized he wanted to be a responsible person, right? And he thinks that this is a general path for guys, right? Like you're chasing girls and you care a lot about how you look and are perceived, but then at some point, for whatever reason, you take on responsibility, you take rules more seriously, you take worldly success more seriously. This is when you start adulting a lot more, and you start prioritizing the adulting things more than you care about how you might appear, and that might mean that you risk cringe for the sake of doing what is right. But that doesn't mean that you're doing this other thing that he calls the religious sphere, which is where you really sacrifice everything for, like, for him it's God, but for a communist philosopher like Alain Badiou, who's basically using his ideas, it would be instead commitment to a cause. Mm-hmm. Right? Or becoming, Badiou also talks about becoming like the trad man. But the point is like, at some point, the worldly success is not enough. You want something transcendent. You want something beyond this world. And so whether that's left, right, secular, religious, the point is like, if they're right, then this is the trajectory life takes. And I resonate with this. I think it's somewhat true. But something that I do say in the brain-mogging clavicular piece that you're referring to is that for Kierkegaard, they're never wholly separable, right? Like you still are going to care about the way that you appear to other people. So, and you'll also care about things being beautiful and stuff like that. So like that will never exactly end. There will always be like this overlap. The question is like, where are you predominantly? Like, what predominantly has your devotion? Yeah. And then the bigger question that you're asking is the question, maybe you can restate it now that I said all of that, but basically Sartre, is he still in the aesthetic sphere?
Is he just repackaging this to fit his strengths, basically? Is he saying, oh, I'm not doing that, but just doing it in a way that feels deniable to himself?
Yeah. Maybe. I don't really feel like I can ever truly be fair to Sartre because I didn't spend enough time reading him. But what does that mean? It means devoting your entire life to him because he wrote so much.
Yeah.
His critique itself is like, is it 2 volumes? And it's like 3,000 pages. It's something ridiculous. And then that's not even Being in Nothingness, which is his main work that people read. And even that, how many people read? Yeah. Who reads more than like 20 pages here or there?
Yeah.
That was assigned to them in college or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, dude. Getting through Being in Nothingness, I like looked through it, did a quick glance over and was like, what do I actually need out of this? And then I basically settled on the chapter about the look. Because good God, man, it's long. Like I'm sure I'll dive back into it for different chunks at some point in time, but it's a lot. You'd mentioned Badiou, who I'd actually never heard of before you had mentioned him. In your article, you mentioned his three bodies. I believe it's perverted, deserving, and sacrificed. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. 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 I think of them as parallels with what Kierkegaard's doing. So the perverted body, he's talking to boys when this is like a transcript of a talk that he gave at some kind of French high school for boys. And so he's basically, going into this thinking like, what do boys need to hear from me? And he's basically talking about how like there's like you basically have three options as a guy. And so the perverted body is really just the party boy. That's how I think of it. It's like you're drinking, you're drugging, you're probably getting a bunch of tattoos. He's kind of an old French guy, so he's like talking about people getting piercings and tattoos. He kind of thinks about this all as part of the same perverse impulse. Which, by the way, he's a radical. He's part of that establishment in French theory, and so it's not like he's moralizing about it, but he's just saying like that you have this period where that's the thing. What was it? The sacrificial body. What was the other one though?
Perverted,
The middle
deserving,
one.
and sacrificed, or sacrificial.
Yeah, deserving. Yeah, deserving. And he doesn't talk about Kierkegaard, but also because he's talking to a bunch of high school kids, I kind of suspect he figured he has to put it in a language that would make more sense to them, and he's not going to sit here and name drop, but I see what he's doing as directly one-to-one here, because the deserving body is like the ethical body in the sense of like we're thinking about worldly success. If we're thinking about the meritocracy, capitalism is a meritocracy. That whether it's a just one or not, the fact is you can earn something, and you can go out there and you can make it happen. And if you do make it happen long enough and hard enough, then somebody will say that you deserved it, and people be like, he's worked his butt off for that. He deserves that. That's kind of the idea of the deserving body. And then the religious or the sacrificial, same thing that I already said about Kierkegaard. It's just that this is a person who's sacrificing their body for a cause. The difference between Badiou and Kierkegaard is that Badiou's not satisfied with any of these three options. That's the main difference, is that he's going to say that the sacrificial body, I think, if I remember right, he thinks that it's too nostalgic. People are sacrificing their body for lost causes, which is kind of funny because, he's basically sacrificed his body for communism, which is a lost cause, So it's like, I think he's semi-aware of that. He's kind of like Slavoj Žižek in the sense that he never really like turns his back on it. But at the same time, he's kind of like, hey, it's the inner truth and greatness of the thing. There's still something there, which is okay for him to say, not for Heidegger, apparently,
Yeah.
But yet he's made a career basically saying it. Yeah.
The idea of deserved conclusions in terms of a meritocracy is interesting to me, because it almost seems like it seems like a lot of it is that people want to gatekeep isn't quite the right word, but there's like an old guard that you almost need to get the approval from. You see this a lot, I would say, primarily with people who are trying out new fields, or just younger, and they're getting a lot of attention in that way. There's a younger dude named Jet Franzen. He makes some like philosophical adjacent content, and he just went on the Modern Wisdom podcast, and a lot of people are like, oh, he's not doing anything, and again, it's this weird like gatekeeping. But I mean, the guy's got a cross platform, millions of followers at this point. I think he's 22 or 23 years old, and it's maybe this is just me kind of recognizing a lot of potential and a lot of hard work, that I'm like, well, obviously he deserves this. This wouldn't be happening had he not put in the effort to get that recognition. But your article on Substack which you already mentioned, with an incredible title, Brain Mogging Clavicular. You mentioned in there that you understand how live streaming would have taken your life over as a younger man. Tell me about that. Hey there. For a video essay that expands on this conversation, check the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get back to it.
I was a YouTuber. I made video essays back in, like 2018, 2019. And by the time 2020 rolls around, my YouTube channel got terminated just because of some weird algorithm thing. It was not anything. There was no people behind the decision. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I had to figure out how to get my channel back because I had something like 3,500 subscribers at that point. I had a small Patreon. I really wanted it back. And so instead I started Twitch streaming all of the time. And it was a lot to figure out how to stream. But once I got the hang of it, I was having a lot of fun, and I figured out how to do big events. I figured out how to, through organizing with other people, catch their audiences when they were done streaming, and so I would get huge audiences from other people. And then, I'd pass that audience on to other people when I finished streaming. And so there's like this sort of cyclone of clout that goes on in the Twitchosphere. But being a part of that requires talking about people a lot more than you're talking about ideas. And so it's not just like, we turn the cameras off and then we have a conversation about, someone reached out to me and they said this and that. And, oh, what do you think about that? And, like a private thing. It's no, everything on Twitch is done out in front of their audience in public. Right. And so one example of that, there was this guy who said that, and this was like left Twitch, right? But left Twitch was part of a bigger universe of political Twitch. And I was still a leftist back then, right? And so there was this guy who I'd had some good conversations with or whatever. I find out that there's like this 12-hour live stream where everybody's going on it and they're all just like giving their takes on him and ragging on him. And then that was followed up the next day by another 12-hour live stream. And then that was followed up the next day by another 12-hour live stream. And I was just like, what is going on? So I reached out to him. I said, what is going on? And he said, this is all because I suggested that transgenderism is related to transhumanism, and you're not allowed to suggest that. He's like, I am an ally. He's saying all the things that he's supposed to say. Yeah. Everyone's got him again. They've all got him against the wall. And he's like, I'm not saying it. I'm just saying, like, we live at a time in history where, and it's very obvious, I think, to everybody with a brain between their ears, that transhumanism is about changing what it naturally meant to be a human, going beyond the natural limits. Obviously, transgenderism is somehow a part of that. And so people were losing their minds, though. And so I saw that, and I remember thinking, like, well, it's really good for clicks. It's really good for getting a bunch of people to stay in your audience. And so it's the gossiping part of it is there. There's all these incentives, but the main thing that I got a little crazy about, and the reason that I left Twitch, beyond the socialite scene, which was suffocating, was the medium itself is a little different from YouTube. And so on YouTube with a live stream, because I have since Twitch days done some serious streaming on YouTube when I had fast internet. There's a really significant difference between the two. And here it is. On YouTube, let's just say someone's streaming, you click onto the video, you can see the video from the beginning if you drag back and go to the beginning. On Twitch, you cannot do that. And so on Twitch, you kind of have to presume that you've only got people for 5 minutes and that there's this rotating door. And chances are they might only pop in for 30 seconds. And so it's just like, what does that actually do to your brain when you can't carry on a conversation that ever references stuff from before without having to constantly unpack it all over again?
Right.
Like that killed me. And it makes sense for video gamers who are playing a game like a walkthrough or whatever. It makes sense for them. Doesn't make sense for serious conversations.
Yeah, well, because I'm like dabbling in streaming right now, and I keep looking at it like watching other people to kind of see what they're doing, one of the things that drives me insane is that there is this constant, almost like a vocal ticking to keep people engaged, where they'll be watching something and they go, "Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. All right. Uh-huh." And there I think part of that is so that they get around the like copyright filter or something of like adding something to it. You know, you've got to have like meaningful addition to it. So maybe it's a workaround of that. But yeah, like I watch it and I mean it's like the vocal version of jangling keys, you know, we just okay. All right. I'm like, "Oh, dude, it's crazy." But anyway, in this vest or in the blah, 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 let me try it again. In the video I say that I'm attaching this to, I propose the
Mm.
idea that you kind of get frozen in time in people's minds. So to your parents, you're always a child. To your best friend that, you know, your childhood best friend that maybe you haven't seen in years, you're still whatever age they left you at or you left them at. A relationship that ended, you're still the person that is in their mind. And it seems like there's not really any way to get away from that. Once people have solidified a certain version of you in their mind. You write a lot about initiation for young boys and men and how that's kind of gone away.
Mm.
What happens to a person who willingly or otherwise has frozen themselves in other people's mind and maybe even their own?
Let me see if I get the question right. So, because yeah, so my parents, I'll always be their son. My childhood best friend, he's probably got me pegged as someone I don't quite recognize in myself at this point, right? But you're asking the bigger question of, but what happens when you peg yourself that way?
Yeah. When you almost solidify your existence as one thing, possibly because there was nothing to no initiation or no rite or ritual that you participated in that makes you actually become more than a 19-year-old kid or
Right.
whatever it may be.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, it's like there's high school, and then there's the job, or there's college, and then there's the job,
Hmm.
and then there's being a parent, and then there's not a lot of things that are universally recognized. Marriage is still there for some people. All
Mm.
that's losing footing more and more every day, and so these rites of initiation are not the same as the kinds of rites of initiation that kids typically went through a lot younger. And that one of the things that I'm noticing about it is that you get 24, 25-year-olds who think of themselves as basically kids still. And then you also have like the rest of society acting like, oh, well, that's still a kid. And it's like, okay, like the founding fathers were like teenagers.
Yeah.
So at, at what point are we going to start treating people like adults, right? Like
Well, a lot of
what's the
people
moment?
seem to perceive, even like you hear people talk about college nowadays, and the way that they talk about college is an extension of high school. So you've got kind of these 24-year-old teenagers that are existing because, you know, like you said, the jobs, the college, the all of these different things that we do are almost of a different caliber or on a different tier than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Right. And so there's two things going on. Like one is going to get us back to Sartre, and I want to talk about that. But the other thing is just like, and Jonathan Haidt talks about this, the way that we have this anxious generation. It's like this screen addicted generation. But also it's been a coddled generation. And so, his earlier book, The Coddling of
Coddling
the
the
American
American
Mind,
Mind.
was you're right. I love that book. And
So
it's
good.
it's good. And there's a lot of ways that, Christina Hoff Sommers also writes about this. There's a lot of ways that the natural inclinations and tendencies of boys have been suppressed, especially boys. It's a bigger problem for boys than girls, but it's still a problem for girls. But the point is that you're not getting real challenges. You're not getting real opportunities to fail. It's all this abstract stuff where it's like, how much are you paying attention in a classroom? How much do you follow authority? Which one of the kinds of people are you in a classroom? Because there's basically like 25 ways of being, and you kind of have to decide which one of those ways of being you're going to be. Like that whole game is not the same thing as like, no, but you've actually gone out and you've killed a deer, or you've fought a bear with your bare hands, or whatever it is
Mm.
that like the kids were expected to go do. Go do some ayahuasca in the desert and come back and talk to us in 3 days. Something crazy was necessary. And now it's like there's like this delayed, it's not just the comfort is extended, constant, the pursuit of comfort is a huge problem, but it's also the deference of the kinds of challenges where you might actually fail. And so, there's this popular book that came out recently called, it's a lot easier than Sartre's Being in Nothingness, by the way. And it's just Michael Easter, The Comfort Crisis. Did you ever read that one?
Mm-mm. Tell me about it.
Okay. So it's great. He basically, he goes to Alaska and spends like 3 months backpacking. And he's also doing all this research in like the health effects of getting out in nature. And at the same time, the negative effects of not taking on challenges. And he talks about how our cultures become so discomfort avoidant, that what we are facing right now is this comfort crisis. And part of it is, that what we need are genuine challenges where there's a real risk of failure. And he says that has to be like at least 70% chance of failing. If you're not annually taking on something where it's like a serious feat of strength and there's like a 70% chance that you're going to fail, it shows in your psyche, it shows in your body. So he follows that out. And I think it's, really, really instructive. What I think he misses is the fact that most people do subject themselves to pretty intense discomfort almost every day. It's called jobs. And so the reason that we're so comfort addicted is because outside of our job, we're exhausted. And so the job is, it's just like, well, then I'm just going to smoke pot and I'm going to play video games and I'm going to jack off and I'm going to play, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like that little goon cave that kind of results outside of work. Like that thing is a product of a world where we just spend all of our time working, right? It's like, this is your way of getting through. I'll take it back to Sartre here in a second on the other thing, but I wanted to see what you would say from that.
Well, I'm 33 right now. And I don't think that probably around 25, 26, maybe 27, I started really thinking about the fact that it didn't feel like there was an event that took place where I was now a man. Theoretically, right. Women have kind of two physical changes that happen where, the first one where they get their period, and then the second one where they have a child. And nothing quite to that degree happens with men. So like, your balls drop, you go through puberty. That's pretty much it. You have a kid, but aside from a few hormonal changes that you experience almost reflexively from what happens to your wife, nothing really changes. There's no real physical event of that resembles initiation for men. And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of young guys get stuck into whatever thing. Like, yes, it's a matter of comfort. It's a matter of not having something that's challenging them to go outside of it. But I also think it's that they are surrounded by the same thing, the same people, the same job, the same kind of everything. And what felt like that change for me was very uncomfortable. It was really scary. A lot of people tried to talk me out of it. And that was, to some people, it doesn't sound like much, but it was moving to Denver from Nevada, where I'm from. So I moved there. I knew maybe 2-3 people, and I got a new job in an industry that I wasn't in. I made new friends. I lived in a new place. I learned new streets. I figured out, the local norms and stuff like that. I had to figure out all these different things. But the most important thing was I wasn't that person anymore. Everybody, to everyone, I was a blank slate. Right. So anybody that I talked to didn't have some preconceived notion about me as the personal trainer or the guy in the band. I was Andrew, the blank slate. So if I wanted to get into like strongman, or if I wanted to get into rock climbing or something, that's just who I always was. Right. So there was the challenging thing that I opted into, the discomfort that I opted into, is also what allowed me to kind of force a sort of initiation for myself, if that makes sense. That's something that I find myself thinking about a lot, is like, I don't think that everybody needs to move. I made another video essay on do people need to move? And I think is helpful for a lot of people. But I also feel like for a lot of people it is in the same vein as running away, you know. But I don't know another way for people to get a full blank slate that allows them to restart and become a new person that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, surrounded by their own circle.
Right, right.
If that answers your question. Do you feel like, is there a version of leaving that is not adolescent at its core?
Ooh. I'll have to cook on that one, but I'll just say for now that I've got friends who never left. But even as I say that, I think, well, they still left for some job. Like my childhood best friend never really left, but he did go do Alaskan crab fishing for like a couple of summers to make some extra
Mm.
money. And then I've got a lot of friends who went to North Dakota to work the oil fields for a while. And so jobs have pulled people away, but those kind of jobs are usually like it's like a short stint.
Right.
But there's this part of me that wants to say as well, like, no, you definitely don't have to leave. And that there's something noble in staying even, but it really kind of depends on you. But then, there's this like conservative part of me that really wants to lean into saying, like, it's very important to have a world that you grew up in, that you're paying back to, that you're building on, that you're committed to, and in sinking those roots and all of that. But where I am different from people who will say this is that I still think that the liberal Rumspringa, what I call the liberal Rumspringa, matters, which is basically the getting away, the going out, starting something fresh, blank slate. It's all this kind of stuff that you're talking about. It's the sowing your wild oats and the trying and failing and figuring out who you are, and that's about as American as a thing as you could possibly get. My issue with the liberal Rumspringa is that it's very different from the Amish Rumspringa, right? And so the basic thing here. Are you familiar with the idea of the Amish Rumspringa?
That's the one where they leave their home and then they have a predetermined amount of time to go, get it out of their system and potentially return.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's actually an indefinite amount of time, but there's no ticking time bomb. The door remains open and they can leave and they can come back 10 years, 20 years later. Like they really can. Of course, they're going to it's going to be pretty weird coming back after that much time, but like something like 98% of them return, and usually within 3 years. And that's with also sometimes there's unplanned pregnancies, sometimes they got into meth, you got to think you're going from like the most sheltered kind of trad lifestyle to
everything.
Yeah. Now some of these places are, like, I understand the Amish will, in some regions of the country, have hundreds of acres for their farms, and they will actually set up sort of like Burning Man zones where it's just like the parents are turning a blind eye. People from the city go there on the regular, and they're having keggers, right? Like and that they're camping out there, and that's the Rumspringa. And part of the reason why the American liberal side of the country doesn't care about the Amish the way that it cares about other brands of conservative, it's twofold. One, the Amish more or less stay out of politics. And two, the Amish are not a cult. They're not completely sheltering. They are giving their kids that chance to go out and experiment. And I think people find that kind of redemptive. And then overall, we all kind of appreciate that there's some people living this way where they haven't adopted technology in a couple hundred years. It's like, well, that's cool. Glad to know that can still work,
Right.
And so, well, that if that's the Amish Rumspringa, then the liberal Rumspringa It's different because it's just presumed to be the morally correct thing, and all cultural traditions that try to have roots are considered bad if they interfere with your absolute individual freedom. So the liberal Rumspringa is about taking children from all cultures and bringing them into cities and schools and universities and saying, hey, there's one right way to be, which is this radical individualist approach that has no roots and no commitments to anything except for your own pleasure. And then you do you be your best self, and all you have to do is be nice, which they mean, but by which they mean harmless. They actually want everyone to be harmless. But as long as you're harmless and doing you, then you're good in their eyes. And it's what's not allowed is the thing that I push for, which is that we do need ceremonies of return the way that the Amish do. I am for the liberal Rumspringa. I'm for people being able to leave. I think that this is where most homeschool families go wrong. It's like, no, you actually, and I come from one, by the way, and it's like, no, you actually need to give people exit ramps into cities, into the thing that they are otherwise rejecting. They have to know what it is, and they have to be able to figure out how to be a person on their own to some extent. But then there has to be that ceremony of return, that prodigal son thing. Yeah. And so it's like the Amish built that in, and it's like, I know all of these different families, religious, Protestant, Catholic, what have you. They don't build the ceremony of return, the rite of return, the welcome home mat into their worldview. It's kind of just presumed you're going to stay here forever. And so what I'm saying is, I don't think everybody needs to leave, but I do think that everybody needs to be told, like, you do have the opportunity to leave. And if you do, you're always going to be welcome back. And when you come back, we'll throw a party for you, and it's going to be great. So like that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah. How much of that leaving of the nest do you think has to do with people just trying to figure themselves out and understand themselves?
Is this kind of going back to the question of like how much of it is adolescent?
I would say it's kind of pulling away from that, going in a little bit more of it. So I'm thinking about a lot of the Sartre stuff, where it's with the look, you're kind of perceiving yourself through other people. You can not only, but to a large degree, somebody else's experience of you informs you about yourself in a way that I don't think you could understand in any other way. So like, to perceive yourself as brave, you have to think, okay, compared to what? Or to see yourself as beautiful, you almost have to have somebody tell you that you're beautiful. So it's, I suppose more so it's, why do you think people want to be understood? If you've watched this far, you're exactly the kind of person that this show is for. The full episode, plus dozens of hours of exclusive podcasts, videos, vlogs, and our members-only Discord are all available through the members-only section on my main YouTube channel, Andrew Briggs, or on Patreon. The links are below. Here's a preview for the rest of this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the other side.
Oh, there are political opposites. So we put them in this little box, and then they do something that defies the box, and we're like, we kind of want them to get back in the box.
Yeah, I need you to believe me, and I have to change your mind. So it's like the only relief that he could get was by influencing somebody else's decision of himself, which ultimately he has no control over.
Well, yeah, and that's what public relations is all about in the world of the press. Public relations, starting with Edward Bernays, is all about the management of reputations for businesses, but it's something that was really for corporations. Like when Bernays was doing this stuff in the 1930s, he was on retainer for the Columbia Rope Factory. They were paying him more than the president of the company. The reason that Socrates drank the hemlock was because even though he knew he could walk free if he snuck out, and he goes, no, I'm gonna make Athens live with this, but also it would be worse than dying to be in exile. And that wasn't just his opinion because he's a man of honor, it's all men of honor's opinion. You know what, let me write a book about how hard my life is so that people can know how far I've come. That is what you're being encouraged to do. But to do that, you also have to divulge so much. It's like, well, I'm still working that stuff out. Is that something that I should be working out in the public spotlight?
You have published through Theory Underground, you've published Zizek, Nick Land, Nina Power, Zipancic, and I think you're going to be publishing me now. What are you building at Theory Underground?